Thank you, Ed. That was awesome. I'm excited to introduce our next speakers. We're welcoming back Merritt Bear from AWS and introducing Rachel Beard from Salesforce. They're going to talk about the frameworks that they use to assess risk at scale and what types of technology they employ as solutions. So over to Merritt, Rachel, and Ed.
Thank you, Kelly, and hello, everyone, and welcome to this session on how to secure 1 million users. I'm delighted to be joined by Merritt Bear, Principal Security Architect at Amazon Web Services, and Rachel Beard, Principal Security Technical Architect at Salesforce. So let's dive straight in. And Merritt, I'm going to start with you if that's okay. Given the shock of COVID-19 has had on businesses across the globe, have you seen your customers reprioritize projects, and what is top of mind in security right now?
Sure. Yes, customers all over are responding with, spinning up and down as you would naturally see. Of course, this is kind of the basic value proposition of cloud, right? That you are able to adjust and to have ephemeral infrastructure that you don't own. So you are able to, even in relatively normal times, you're able to experiment, to have flexibility and agility. This speaks to software development life cycles moving from waterfall to agile. But when you were talking about, large enterprises, they may be investing in different directions than they expected and spinning down some of the ones that they might have anticipated. But of course, that is the flexibility of cloud, right? So, thinking through that and what does that mean and how do they turn and how do their decision-making and budgeting processes keep up with those kinds of changes is a challenge for sure, but it's something that, cloud is uniquely suited to.
Sure. And in anything in particular, you mentioned kind of spinning up, spinning down, which I guess is technical talk for reprioritization. Anything particular with security, I guess, with working from home? Are you seeing companies kind of putting more resource into something that enables this remote workforce? Or do you think companies were pretty well equipped for this?
It depends on the enterprise, right? And I think that was really more of a cultural adjustment than it was a technological one. Some companies are used to just like having employees come in and sit at desks. But I think part of this is in a mature enterprise, we sometimes refer to moving past perimeter-based considerations, but that doesn't mean that the perimeter stops mattering. You want to have both, right? So you want to have some sort of controls that are independent of the network, but then you also want to make use of some of your perimeter-based awareness. And ideally, these resources are not only working in conjunction, but are aware of one another. So we're talking about, things like the fact that every call in AWS is authorized with SigV4. And then at the same time, the fact that you should be building in a VPC and having some of these more traditional network barriers.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for teeing us up for a great conversation, Merritt. Rachel, would love to bring you into the conversation. Salesforce, is pretty well renowned for bringing many enterprises, from a traditional on-prem model, to the cloud. And I think we've all got a lot to thank Salesforce for in that. But I guess not every enterprise is quite there. Would just love to hear some of your thoughts on kind of what are the remaining concerns. Has COVID-19 kind of changed those concerns? Have you seen any changes there? And how do you work with customers who maybe are uncomfortable? How do you, in your role, work with customers to help them make that transition?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I hear from a lot of our customers with different concerns, and I've seen a lot more prioritization on data governance throughout this process. Many of my customers went into the COVID-19 situation with a well-defined set of policies around remote work, and they had permanent remote workforce already. I'm a permanent remote worker myself. However, I was really surprised by how many did not have that concept and had employees leave to become remote workers without company-issued devices. So now they had the issue of managing these cloud technologies. So sorry, pardon me. So now they had the concern of managing these cloud technologies and having to put some guardrails in place around their use. If they weren't already on a VPN or getting single sign-on and multi-factor authentication in place, those became the top priorities. And then again, when you can't manage your employees' devices because they own it, now you have to think again about what can you manage in terms of your application controls themselves as well.
So back to Merit. Something that we've been hearing quite a lot of enterprises talking about right now, and actually asking Tessian about this, is kind of what they call the Hollywood scenario, which an example would be a system administrator being blackmailed or coerced into doing something. What mechanisms does AWS have in place to limit kind of this insider threat? And do these principles apply broadly to all organizations, or are there kind of, I guess, specific principles just because you're a very large infrastructure provider? I think I don't know if you'd agree, but it's coming up more and more in our discussions around this kind of insider threat, who has access to data. I guess it's maybe tied into the conversation of on-prem, cloud, et cetera.
Sure. I think there's basically two large categories of controls that come into play here. One is the technical controls, so just actually enforcing least privilege, minimization of blast radius, for lack of a better term, but basically ensuring that you've cleaned up your permissions and that you have a process in place for getting folks off the books who are no longer employees. Just classic scenarios. It sounds like bread and butter, and yet you have to have someone whose job it is to do this. As Eric Brandwein would say, if it's not someone's job, it's a hope, and a hope is not a plan. So creating mechanisms to minimize permission creep. And one of the ways we do that is with technical controls. So, technical controls to monitor those technical controls. So for example, we have IAM Access Analyzer that will look at whether there are overly broad permissions. And this uses the automated reasoning group. So it's an engine called Zelkova that is using formal methods to compare, whether this permissions path is overly broad, whether it could have escalations. These days, some of these permissions as written can become really onerous for humans to manually compare, but computers are good at that. So giving it, a solvable problem to a computer is one way that we allow customers, and we also leverage the ability to kind of reason about our networks. However, ultimately, there will also be a need for the human side of policies, like policy with a lowercase p. So for example, you can't recover from a password reset and stuff without multiple people on the AWS side signing off. And that's not a technical control. It's just a human level decision that we have made. We are always separated. There's a data plane and a control plane. So AWS employees are not looking at customer content anyway. What they would have access to at best would be ciphertext. But at the same time, we, make sort of human level decisions about those policies. And I think one way to enforce that for customers or for, other enterprises is to think, what's the right balance here? How do we get the ability to, have a break glass scenario, but not have it be exploited? So part of that is to assume that it's rare for, there to be three bad actors who are all in on it, or just three, folks who fell for a phishing scam or something. So you usually look to sort of implement something that feels like a little bit more of a check control that is just on the human level.
Yeah, no, I think that's what we're hearing many of our customers saying, especially, just basic non-technical concepts of having many humans in the loop, assume not more than one compromised actor, and bring in all of these mechanisms so that, one bad actor cannot cause much damage, and build in many kind of human in the loop processes. Merit, talking about hearing other presentations, I've heard you talk about zero trust a lot in the past, and I think it's not particularly well understood. So I wonder if you could give a brief overview of zero trust for our audience, and also just give us a feel for where we are in kind of the zero trust world. Are organizations already adopting it? Have we still got a long way to go? Is it the future, etc.? I just know it comes up quite a lot, and it's quite a misunderstood topic, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that that's part of the problem here is that it's really not a new or self-contained idea. If someone is out there trying to sell you zero trust, beware. I think that it can be helpful as a framework to think about the kinds of controls that you want to put in place. But basically, I think the consensus I've seen is that zero trust connotes that where you are in the network should not influence the ability that you have to access important resources. So that being said, it can take a lot of incarnations, like you said. And I think the way that we try to think about it is, in some ways we have been like the OGs of zero trust forever. Because like I was saying, every request that comes through is authenticated through SigV4. Like we have tons of traffic going through the internet every day, and it gets authenticated and is in some ways, that's a testament in and of itself. But I think the idea here is that that you have both those perimeter-based controls and the network-aware controls, the internal ones like security groups and network access control lists, and that they are not only, both working, but that they are aware of one another, because ultimately you're thinking about user experience too. Just because you can lock down everything doesn't mean you should. There's no need to, and in fact, we see repercussions if folks put sort of unnecessary burden on the user. People tend to find shortcuts and to try to find ways around it. So I think the way that we think about zero trust is being common sense about how to have this mix of, perimeter-based versus sort of network agnostic controls, and then the right set of controls for the right scenario. Again, it kind of depends on your tool and what you're looking for. But I think, we're seeing a move toward managed services in general. And part of that, I think, is the security posture that it allows you to benefit from, that you have some kind of default controls built in there. And that when given that shared responsibility model where AWS owns the bottom layers of stack from, the concrete floor up to layer 4, the hypervisor, when the customer traditionally owns the application layers up through layer 7. With managed services, you've bought yourself a little bit more of the those higher layers of the stack having some influence and control and security injections from us. So I think customers have an appetite for that, and it's been helpful to be able to give some higher degree of white glove when that's what they want.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to what Merritt said about shortcuts, if that's all right. That's been something I've been really concerned with this COVID environment, is that everyone's really overextended right now. Our work days in general have expanded, and oftentimes we're working while taking care of others in our household. So I'm really concerned with users who are working quickly and taking shortcuts. I've been working with my customers to go above and beyond their basic access controls that they've already delivered around how do users log in and what can they see and do when they're logged in, but really getting into then the monitoring. How are your users actually behaving? What are they doing? What records are they accessing? Are they downloading reports? And then once you have that kind of behavior modeling, what can we do to automate real-time prevention of data loss? And that's been a big topic for a lot of my customers in the last few months.
Great. Thank you for jumping in there, Rachel. I guess staying on the topic of automation, Rachel, I don't know if you want to add on and go a little bit deeper, but how could customers build automation off the back of something like unusual activity, unusual downloads? Like, what do those workflows look like for the customers that you are working with?
So we have an event monitoring product that's part of our overall Shield solution that allows customers to build transaction security policies that work in real time. They can prevent things like a download of a large report, or even prevent sensitive data from even ever being added to a report. That way you can make sure that it's never rendered in bulk, so it can't be printed or screenshotted or anything else either. Again, with that context of users on their own devices, I worry about someone downloading a lot of data onto a personal device, and it could also have that data synced elsewhere. You can't control it at that point, it can proliferate. So I've been advising them on that. And then we also recently delivered threat detection, which uses machine learning for helping to understand some of those report anomaly patterns.
Perfect. Thanks for that summary. I think, what we're hearing, just to add a little bit of context as well, I'm sure you're hearing this as well, but what we're seeing is this whole personal device piece has introduced a lot of complexity to security teams, because it's not necessarily malicious, right, to download something on a personal device. Maybe it's someone, like you said, shortcutting. It's easier to download something onto their personal device because they have a tool on their personal device where they can do a lot of data crunching really easily. They're not necessarily leaking information. It's just the remote work kind of forces them down these kind of shortcut paths. But of course, from a security and compliance angle, it still should be avoided. So it's a really interesting kind of gray area. So thanks for sharing that. We're almost at time, so would love to maybe just let you both have the opportunity to maybe just leave us with kind of a learning that you've had in the last 5 months, something that surprised you, that maybe you didn't think going into the situation that we're in. Just what has kind of surprised you working with your customers? What have you learned that you think our audience would find interesting? Merit, maybe you could take this one first.
I feel like, I could answer something about, poetry and the way that we have been responding to everything as humans at this point. I think that it's been interesting to see how things cycle. One thing that I've noticed is that we seem to kind of have a regular rhythm, and then people will have a week where they just feel really brittle. And I think that there's just such a human component to all of this. So, I could talk to you about the sort of enterprise things that are happening at AWS, or, the new quantum computing tool we have. But really, I think ultimately part of the take home of these past few months has been the humanity of each of us being kind of strained. And I think, it's also a time that is interesting to try to connect with your colleagues, to try to recruit. This is the part where I tell folks, come work for us. Feel free to send me a note and I will, put in a referral for you. But, the need for diverse and healthy teams, and then the difficulty of that, which is really highlighted when everyone is thrust into caregiver roles. And I think that, for me, that has been, I don't know about surprising, but that has been the dominant theme of the last few months.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Merit. And Rachel, very quickly, because we are at time, what is one takeaway for you?
Yeah, for me, it's been the theme of resilience. It's always seen as a virtue, but actually it's added some real challenges this year, because the resilient nature of our workers and adapting to change in how they work has caused for a lot of adjustments. And organizations can't always deliver on how they're going to adjust their security model accordingly as fast as our users adapt the way that they work. So it's been really interesting to observe that.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. We are at time now. I think that's kind of two key points to end on, and two great points, which is we are all in, this is a very human problem and a very human challenge. And what is needed is a lot of resilience. And it's great to see the resilience that's being shown around the world. So thank you, Merit. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for spending time and sharing your insights. Back to you, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Ed, Merit, and Rachel. So as we round out our first section, let's take a look at some of the top tips we've learned from our speakers thus far. Number 1, understand your new normal security baseline. Attackers are opportunistic and they thrive during crises. And as we know, we are living through multiple simultaneous crises right now. So you need to work out what attacks are going to be normal or expected, and then educate your employees on them. Interrogate your data. Everyone is overextended right now, working harder and longer than ever before, but it's really important that you take time to look at and monitor your data in order to prevent any inadvertent data loss. And number 3, consider the human component. Just because you can lock down all systems doesn't mean that you should. You want to avoid employees taking potentially unsafe shortcuts around blunt permission paths.